All right. Well, thank you again for joining me for part two of our deep dive into Samson. And this is actually going to be four total chapters. So it's 13 through 16. So 13, 14, 15, 16. So I know that I did make the comment in our last video that it was only going to be 3 episodes. It will be 3 episodes, but it will be 4 chapters. So in our next and final episode that we have on our deep dive on Samson, it will be covering 2 chapters in that. So we're going to jump right into our reading because we're going to get through this. And as always, I'm going to stop as we go through this. So if you have any comments as I'm going through this, please put them down below and we'll talk about them. And maybe we'll even have a follow-up video to talk about all of your comments on this. So Judges 14, we're going to read it together. Samson went down to Timnah because in our last one, chapter 13, it's just telling us that Samson was born. We don't get to see a lot of the gap between now and him being a young man. Samson went down to Timnah and saw a young Philistine woman there. He went back and told his father and his mother, "I have seen a young Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as a wife." But his father and mother said to him, "Can't you find a young woman among your relatives or among any of our people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines for a wife?" Doesn't that resonate with a lot of people? Just going to unequally yoke yourself. I really believe this is, one of those things that God's trying to teach us in knowing this story of Samson, because he's been told, don't go to these Philistine women. They're not believers in God, but he wants them anyway because they're good looking. And it happens to all of us. We always think we're going to rescue somebody, right? Doesn't always work that way. But Samson told his father, "Get her for me. She's the right one for me." Now his father and mother did not know this was from the Lord, who wanted the Philistines to provide an opportunity for a confrontation. At that time, the Philistines were ruling Israel. Samson went down to Timnah with his father and his mother and came to the vineyards of Timnah. Suddenly, a young lion came roaring at him. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully on him, and he tore the lion apart with his bare hands as he might have torn a young goat. But he did not tell his father and mother what he had done. Then he went and spoke to the woman because she seemed right to Samson. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. This is the same Spirit, or the Holy Spirit, that can be inside of us. So that's something that we have to learn to harness. Then, what did we see? The same thing over and over again, because she seemed right to Samson. Didn't seem right to his father and his mother, but it seemed right to Samson. How stupid can we be sometimes? He's been given power from birth, but he fights his own flesh. After some time, when he returned to marry her, he left the road to see the lion's carcass, and there was a swarm of bees with honey in the carcass. He swooped some honey into his hands and ate it as he went along. When he came to his father and mother, he gave some to them, and they ate it. But he did not tell them that he had scooped the honey from the lion's carcass. Interesting. Kind of like, if you think about it, going back to the story of Adam and Eve, Eve didn't tell Adam where that fruit was from, right? Until he ate it. His father went to visit the woman, and Samson prepared a feast there, as young men were accustomed to do. When the Philistines saw him, they brought 30 men to accompany him. "Let me tell you a riddle," Samson said to them. "If you can explain it to me during the 7 days of the feast and figure it out, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. But if you can't explain it to me, you must give me 30 linens of garments and 30 changes of clothes. Tell us your riddle, they replied. Let's hear it. So he then said, out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. After 3 days, they were unable to explain the riddle. On the fourth day, they said to Samson's wife, persuade your husband to explain the riddle to us, or we will burn you and your father's family to death. Did you invite us here to rob us? So Samson's wife came to him, weeping, and said, you hate me and you don't love me. You told my people the riddle, but haven't explained it to me. Look, he said, I haven't even explained it to my father or mother, so why should I explain it to you? She wept the whole 7 days of the feast, and at the last, on the seventh day, he explained it to her because she had nagged him so much. Then she explained it to her people. On the seventh day, before the sun set, the men of the city said to him, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? So he said to them, if you hadn't plowed with my young cow, you wouldn't know my riddle now. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully on him, and he went down to Ashkelon and killed 30 of their men. He stripped them and gave their clothes to those who had explained the riddle. In a rage, Samson returned to his father's house, and his wife was given to one of the men who had accompanied him. Interesting. So we see often in our lives where people say that the Bible doesn't hold much truth to today's culture, but really it does. We see in this case, his father and mother tell him, you shouldn't be with those Philistine women. He did it anyway. And you're going to see into the next chapter, as we get into Judges 15, how Samson can't help himself. So, Judges 15. Later on, during the wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat as a gift and visited his wife. I want to go to my wife in her room, he said, but her father would not let him enter. I was sure you hated her, her father said, so I gave her to the one of the men who accompanied you. Isn't her younger sister more beautiful than she is? Why not take her instead? Samson said to them, this time I will be blameless when I harm the Philistines. So he went out, caught 300 foxes. He took torches and turned the fox's tail to tail, put a torch between each pair of tails. Then he ignited the torches and released the foxes into the standing grain of the Philistines. He burned the piles of grain and the standing grain, as well as the vineyards and the olive groves. Then the Philistines asked, who did this? They were told, it was Samson, the Timnite son-in-law, because he took Samson's wife and gave her to his companion. So the Philistines went to her and her father and burned them to death. Then Samson told them, because you did this, I swear that I won't rest until I have taken vengeance on you. He tore them limb from limb and then went down and stayed in the cave of the rock of Edom. The Philistines went up, camped in Judah, and raided Lehi. So the men of Judah said, why have you attacked us? They replied, we have come to tie Samson up and pay him back for what he did to us. Then 3,000 men of Judah went to the cave at the rock of Edom, and they asked Samson, don't you realize that the Philistines ruled us? What have you done to us? I have done to them what they did to me, he answered. They said to him, we have come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines. Then Samson told them, swear to me that you yourselves won't kill me. No, they said, We won't kill you, but we will tie you up securely and hand you over to them. So they tied him up with 2 new ropes and led him away from the rock. So it's important. It's important to understand what we're seeing in the disobedience from between Samson and his parents. And 2, we see the manipulation that's happening. Now, I know what's about to happen. I know you probably don't. If you do, you know what's about to happen in this next part of the story, and we're going to hold that until our next episode together. But it is something that we see the back and forth between his family where that obedience isn't there. They're telling him one thing, he's doing another thing. And we also can see that Samson can't control himself very well. And we see a little bit so far. We're about to see some manipulation from Samson. Because 3,000 men, they knew how strong Samson was, but we're about to see an unleashing of rage. So join me in the next one. If you've never heard this story before, it's a great one. I think everyone should read Judges. And after Judges, I think we're going to do some more stories of some very masculine men. I like telling these stories just so people can see how strong some of these characters in the Bible were. And I think it's important as we move forward as men to strengthen ourselves and know that we can get strength, pure strength from God, just like Samson did. So join me in our next episode together as we finish up the story of Samson and where his life is leading. Hope you have a wonderful evening, and God bless you.